Welcome, James.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's been really nice to be invited. It's a real pleasure to come on and chat to you about the book.
Awesome. Yeah, it's absolutely great to have you. We've all enjoyed reading it. We all love Will Riker on this show, so it's
unabashedly love him.
Unabashedly, yes. It's been a pleasure reading it. So just real quick for anybody listening who's either live on Twitch or in podcast form, this will contain spoilers for The Dark Veil. So this is your warning to leave now and come back and listen later if you haven't finished the book yet. James, I'm not sure if you get this question a lot, but I know that I'm curious about the process about how to get a Star Trek book written and published. Is it like a series or film where they have a general idea and pick the best author for the job to flesh it out? Or do you go to those Trek higher ups and say, hey, I have this great idea for a Star Trek book. What do you guys think?
Yes, to both of us. It is neither one or the other. Sometimes we will get a call from Simon & Schuster from the powers that be at Simon & Schuster, and they say, you know what we'd really like is we'd love, let's say, we'd like a TOS novel talking about McCoy. Could you do that? Or it might be something like, we're doing Star Trek Picard. Do you have an idea for a story that would fit in that kind of series milieu? Or it might be just something completely open where it would be, do you want to do a Star Trek novel of any kind? What story would you like to tell? What world would you like to tell it in? What timeline would you like to tell it in? So it's very much dependent on needs of the line at that particular time. So a couple of years back, I got offered the opportunity to write a novel, and Margaret Clark, my editor, said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, you know what, I've always wanted to do a kind of late TOS era, proper full-on brassy classic Trek kind of full color story. So that was how I wrote The Lat of Fire with my Star Trek Discovery novel. Kirsten Beyer, who is formerly a Star Trek novelist who's now moved on to work as a producer and a writer on the TV
and she's
show.
Been doing a great job on the shows.
Absolutely. Yeah, she is. And Kirsten really enjoyed some of the stuff I've done with Star Trek Titan. And she said, specifically asked for me and said, can Jim come in and do a Discovery novel for us? And that was how we ended up doing the Saru novel. So the answer to your question is it works both ways. It depends pretty much on what the line needs at that time and what's popular, what shows are on TV, and what things we know that ideally that the readership are really going to enjoy.
Very cool.
Awesome. So as we mentioned earlier, Dark Veil is now the second Picard novel set in the Kurtzman era of Star Trek. Now, you're no stranger to Will Riker, the Titan, having written the Titan novels Sight Unseen and Synthesis. How is it coming back to not only the characters of Will and Deanna, but the Titan itself?
Well, I wanted to do this book. Is when we first started having a conversation about doing a Picard novel. Kirsten had spoken to me. Originally, we talked about doing a 7 of 9 book.
Oh, cool.
Because we have that gap in Seven's history between the end of Voyager and the beginning of where we see her in Picard. And there's some great story to be told there. And we talked about that. And I was like, yeah, this could be really cool. But as the conversation went on, I think they kind of came to the conclusion that it was too cool a story just to put in a novel, is that maybe it might be something they want to explore in a TV show. So we started looking at other options, and we were looking at things that had been mentioned in Picard, but hadn't really been explained in depth, because the show moves very, very quickly. It's got a very kind of compacted narrative. There isn't really a lot of room for you to kind of drop a story in between the plots of the episodes. So we were telling stories that kind of orbit around the whole of the Picard series. So we were looking at different ideas. One idea that we had was after Picard resigns his commission, Worf is his first officer on the Enterprise, and Worf becomes captain of the Enterprise. So it's like, how would that story work with Worf being kind of shoved into the position of being captain when maybe he's not ready for it? And that's an interesting idea. And the other concept we talked about was, what about something about Riker and Troy, and also talking about their son Thaddeus, who we only learn about kind of after his death. Spoiler alert! In the events of Star Trek Picard. And because Riker and Troy were honestly my favorite couple in all of Star Trek, I really enjoyed writing them in the Titan novels that I did. And I just said, that's the story I want to tell. Let me tell a Titan story. Let me tell a Riker Troy story, because I think I could do some interesting things with that. And that was how the genesis of the Dark Veil kind of came around.
Oh, that's awesome. You also got to bring back one of the characters from the novels, Commander Christine Vale, Will's number 1. What was the process of bringing one of the characters from the timeline of books that may no longer fit in the newer Trek canon established by Picard and Lower Decks?
Well, she's not actually the only one who we brought back from the Titan novels. There are actually 3 characters that we brought back. obviously Christine Vale is the main one, and she's the fan favorite.
Right.
But we also brought back Ranul Keru, who was the unjoined Trill. He was the sort of security tactical officer. He was a personal favorite of Kirsten's. And when we were discussing the character, she said, "Oh, I really like him. Can we bring him back?" And another one I brought back was one of the engineering crew, Karen McCready, who is named after a good friend of mine who's also a science fiction writer, because I just knew that she would get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
Bring her back on the bridge of the ship. So, but the process we went through was obviously the Titan Litverse novels exist in this kind of time stream, and the Picard TV show and the Picard time novels exist in a different time stream because the plot lines branch. So it's like, well, these are the same, but they are different. So how do we cross characters over from one to the other? It's not like we had a checklist where we were sitting there going, okay, this is good, but this is bad. Yes or no, yes or no. We made it a little bit more organic than that. It was more a question of what feels right, what characters do people like to see, what characters do I want to write. And Vale is a really cool character. She's been like one of the breakout characters that we've created in the Litverse over the last sort of like 10 or 15 years. So I knew that if I didn't put her in the story, I would upset a lot of people. And it also felt to me like the dynamic of the characters, the Riker and Troy dynamic is one thing, but having Vale in that storyline as well, the dynamic of these three people being the command crew of the Titan, I really liked writing that in the previous novels. And I thought, well, why do I not want to write that again in this different version? Here's a chance to go back to these great characters and just tell a different version of the story. So that's kind of why we made that choice.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Vale's very much seems like she's got that young kind of just badassery that Will Riker had. When he was a younger officer, just kind of that same energy. Was that intentional?
Yeah, there's definitely, I think throughout all of Vale's appearances, she does have a little bit of that. Maybe I think that you could believe, right, that Will would look at her and see, here's a little bit of me in her. And maybe, he could maybe be thinking, well, what Jean-Luc Picard did for me, mentoring and tempering me as an officer, is something that I could do for Christine Vale. I've always thought of her as just sort of no nonsense, straight up and down, the idea that she's this ex-cop. So she kind of brings that sort of like, business-like energy. She's not going to take any shit from anybody.
Oh, right? Not at all.
and I like that as well. And she's actually, sometimes she's a bit more straight-laced than Riker is, because Riker's always quite free and easy. And I think having a first officer who is a reflection of a different aspect of a personality works well, because the two characters bounce off each other well. We always thought of her, I think the model for her, and a lot of time we talked about Kara Thrace from Battlestar Galactica, is awesome. The look and the sort of swagger, if you want to have it, was very much, she was strongly influenced by that, and still is.
And it's nice to see a first officer female character, and like it just something a little different. And like you say, the way that they all sort of work together, it helps. It really feels like that crew exists to me. Like I want to see that TV show now, because now I feel like I know everybody on that bridge. And and have you seen, I assume you've seen Lower Decks, and did you know that they were going to show up at the end of the season and come in? And
I did not know that. No one told me that. I don't know if that decision had been made, or we were just completely kept from that. And it's funny as well, because when I started writing the book, right at the very beginning, I put a Lower Decks joke in, because you've got to remember the timeline, the way these things work. When I was writing the novel, Lower Decks had not aired at all. Mm-hmm. There was just nothing but concept art. There was no clips, no nothing. We just knew what the name of the ship was, and we'd seen some sort of pictures of the characters, and that was about it. And I put in a reference to the USS Cerritos, mm-hmm. where it's just a scene where one of the supporting characters talks about having transferred from the Cerritos onto the Titan. And it was and he was a helm officer, and we were talking about it. And in the end, Dayton Ward, who also works with us, another one of the writers, he's also part of the sort of brains trust that makes sure we keep everything on the right track. We talked about it, and in the end, Dayton said to me, "You know what? I'm not sure if Mike Mahon might blow up the Cerritos by the end of the first season of the show." Because the thing is this novel is set like a few years after season 1 of Lower Decks. And so we don't want to look like idiots. And I said, well, it could be the Cerritos A, maybe. But in the end, we talked around it. And in the end, we decided to drop out. And it's a shame. It would have been a nice nod to kind of legitimize that show. We have Boimler being transferred to the Titan, mm-hmm. and then we have And then we have like that great moment, when I love that clip where he just goes, "It's the Titan," and he points to the ship and it comes sweeping in.
Yeah, just the way he's so excited.
Yeah. And that's me. That's my reaction. Absolutely, my reaction, 100%.
It was all of our reactions.
Yeah, I think we all had the same exact reaction when we saw it. It's just so amazing.
It was definitely a kind of booyah, sort of like, as I said, I was talking to some other guys recently, and I said, what was it like? I was just kind of, that meme picture of Leonardo DiCaprio where he points at the screen?
Yeah.
I was totally doing that. And it felt to me, it was on a lot of levels, it really felt great, because having written the Titan crew through, a bunch of different novels, I feel really connected to them. And I feel like it's not just, obviously it's not just me, there's a whole bunch of other writers as well. And Sharon Tarango created the artwork for the ship and everything. Titan the crew has a lot of parents, I guess you could say. And we all feel like, it's like seeing our kid up on stage. And seeing the Titan appear on screen in a Star Trek TV show legitimizes, I think, the hard work that we did creating that ship and the mythology around it in the Litverse. And I really hope we see more of it in season 2.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to get it in season 2. Do you think that we're going to get, more of these characters that you've written, or have you not really heard anything about that yet?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. Again, Lower Decks is taking place quite a period before the books that we're writing right now. So we've got kind of 4 years of wiggle room. People were saying to me, you're writing about the Titan. Why is Boimler not on board the ship in this novel? And I said, well, this is like 4 or 5 years later.
He's already gotten the boot, man. He's already
been kicked out by now. It's like he's abusing his holodeck privileges, and then that's what happened. So what can I say? So that's the end of that. It would have been nice to find a place, I think, to put a reference in there, because I just like dropping in Easter eggs from different shows. I just think that's fun, and I know that the readers love that kind of stuff. But sadly, it wasn't to be. But still, it's still a great connection to have.
What's your headcanon on Riker being like 5, 6, 7, 8, and Deanna being like, oh god?
Yeah. That's the that 5, 6, 7. I think, man, I wish I thought of that. Because that's like
so hard.
And the thing is that's pure Will Riker, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just, there's no point where you look at that and go, he wouldn't say that. It's like, yes, he would totally. Because he's just, what I like about that scene is it just shows that he just loves being a starship captain, and he loves being out there, and he loves being out there with his wife and his family and his crew and just doing cool stuff. And that's definitely something that I've always felt is at the heart of the character, the sheer joy that the Riker Troys have about doing the job that they do. And I tried to make sure that I put that in the novel as well.
Oh, do I start on the next one?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Come on in, yeah.
Editing. Sorry. So let's get back into the book, which I can say we all thoroughly enjoyed, as did our Discord collective who read along with us. One of the characters you got to write about in the Dark Veil was Will and Deanna's son Thaddeus, who, as we learn via Star Trek Picard, tragically passes away a few years later. That being said, we get the impression you had a lot of fun writing this very young, very intelligent child of such beloved characters.
Yeah, Thad was a lot of fun to write. Again, when we were coming up with the core concept for the story, Kirsten said to me, we've got this really interesting character, but all we ever see from him in the show is you just see the echo of his passing. You just see the effect that he had on his family. And obviously that's a tragic story, but she said there's a good story to tell here. There's a non-tragic story to tell about this wonderful young fella who had a great life and had a loving family before this terrible thing happened to him. Let's tell that story. Let's find a place for that narrative. So I'm looking at that and thinking, here's this kid, 5 or 6 years old in the novel, he's smart, he's precocious. Of course he would be, having Troy and Riker as his mum and dad, right? Of course he's going to be, sharp, and he's going to be a questing type of kid. And he's definitely going to be the kind of kid who gets himself into trouble and kind of, gets himself in over his head, because that just feels like that's what the young Will and young Deanna would have been like when they were smaller. So I thought, I've got to make him that kind of kid.
Erin, sorry, James, real quick. Erin texted me a point, like when you're saying that, at one point she's reading the book and she's like, "Oh man, Thaddeus is a bit of a little shit sometimes."
Yeah.
I did. I was, and I listened to the audiobook, and I was just like, what is this kid doing? Like running around being crazy. And Julian and I talked about it. And he's like, no, are you kidding? Like look at all of the kids in Star Trek. Like they're all off on their own, having their own adventures, like Starfleet officers. And like as the book progressed, I was like, yeah, you're totally right. Like who wouldn't do that? You're on like a crazy ship and you see crazy things, and you're the leader of your friends. And you know, that kind of reminded me of being a kid, because I was kind of that kid who was like, let's do it, you know, without thinking about it. So it actually, I had to sit, like, that's why Julia and I text each other, because I was like, hey, how do you feel about this? And then like it was nice, it was like contextual.
Thad doesn't have very good impulse control, but he is a 6-year-old, right? You know, so we can forgive him. I mean, I just, what I tried to do is I wanted to make him feel realistic, because one thing you see often when people write kids is they don't feel like kids. So I'm reaching out to sort of my family and friends, and I'm looking at my nieces and nephews, and I'm thinking, okay, what's the thing about them that feels true to me? So it is the sort of thing where they just, you know, they never look before they leap, right? And I wanted to get that sort of feeling in there. But I also wanted to play around with the idea that, you know, he's a sharp kid, he's a smart kid, but he's still a kid. And there's an event from my life. Is one of my nephews. I can remember hanging out with him for a day, and he's a really sharp kid. He's very, very bright. And I forgot that I was talking to a child, and I just, you know, he was just a little adult. And then he got into a fight with his sister, and he just burst into tears and he ran from the room. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, he's a kid.
Yeah.
I forgot he was a kid, because we were just talking like regular people. And I thought, oh my God, he's only 6 years old. Of course, he's only 6 years old. And that kind of dichotomy between the way that kids can be so precocious and such a sponge for information, and at the same time, they're these small little fragile things that we should protect. I wanted to put that in there to give him that duality, to make Thaddeus feel true. And that's why, you know, and yeah, he's a little shit at times, but kids are, right? They're always pushing the boundaries. I put a line in a dialogue where one of the characters says, you know, that's what kids do, is kids look for where the wall is and then they push at it to see how far you let them go. And that's how they define the shape of their world. So I wanted to definitely try and make Thaddeus feel like that's the kind of kid he is.
Yeah, like it's so true, because I have a 6-year-old. I think, Julian, you have a 6-year-old as well, right?
5 and 2.
So close.
And the dynamic is just insane.
Yeah, and looking at that, like it reminds me of my daughter, because we're in quarantine right now in Canada. So she's stuck inside all the time. So anytime we get to go outside, she's like, I have to explore. I have to go do this. I have to go do that. I'm like, oh, whoa, it's adventure time. I know, but you gotta chill.
See, through a kid like Thaddeus, right? You know, and Dad being the command crew of a starship, you know, every day is adventure day for him, right?
Yeah.
And you can imagine the kind of environment that he's exposed to. And I wanted to make him feel like he's like, almost in a way, he wants to be a little Starfleet officer, you know. So when his mother's saying to him, you know, you can't go off and do things, and he's like, well, you know, I thought that's what Starfleet do. I'm going boldly. You know, I'm exploring. Isn't that what Starfleet does? And he kind of calls his parents on it. It's like, that's not what we meant, young man. Go to your room.
It makes sense though, because as a child, even through teenage years, you're trying things on, like different personalities on. You're like, oh, I like that. Like I remember, you know, being, you know, in high school, and it's like, everybody there is wearing punk rock stuff. I'm gonna be punk rock. You know, like, you try on all these different personas, and I think as a kid that makes even more sense. You see everyone around you Starfleet, it's like, I'm Starfleet, like that makes total sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want him to be like I didn't want him to be like Wesley, be the super clever kid who saves the day all the time. I always think that Wesley's one of my favorite characters from Star Trek as well, and I think he was badly served by the writers who just made him too one note. So I didn't want to do the same thing. I think, you know, if we want to talk about, I think the most fully fleshed out young man, it's got to be Jake Sisko. Because I think Jake to me had an arc through DS9 that felt real and true. So again,
literally grow up with Jake. I mean, we literally, yeah.
So yeah, you see him going from being like kind of like, you know, a kind of precocious kid to being a young man who kind of has a destiny for himself. And if you follow the novels as well, you know, he matures even further past that point. And, you know, kudos to Cyril Lofton for being such a great actor as well to bring that to life. So that truth of that we saw in Jake is I wanted to kind of do that, even in a small way here in this story. We don't see Thaddeus over a long period of his life, but I wanted to sort of, it's like I keep saying, I wanted to make him feel real as much as I possibly could, because he's a character, you know, maybe one day we might possibly see him on screen, but for now we're not seeing him on screen. So I want to flesh him out as much to make him feel as true a character as Riker and Troy and everybody else.
Speaking of Riker in that, I always knew Deanna would make a good mother in that, but I always wondered what kind of father Will Riker would make, given how complicated the relationship was with his own father and how him losing his mother early on in that. Was that factored in when you were writing it up?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of figured that Will would definitely be fun dad, right? I mean, I think that if anything, maybe he would be too fun dad, because I think he would probably overcompensate because of the fact that, you know, his personal relationship with his dad wasn't that good. I mean, he had that, you know, that's sort of long distance relationship, and there was a coldness there, and you can see that he definitely carries that kind of that around with him. And I think at this point in his life, when now he's married, now he's a father, I think maybe he's got past that to the point that, like we all do when we mature, you know, when we're younger, we wonder why our parents do stuff, and then you get to their age and you go, oh, that's why. That's why my dad said that. That's why my mum said that. And I think Riker's in a position now to understand his dad better because of the things he's gone through in his life. But at the same time, he's not going to be the same dad as Carl Riker was to him. You know, he's going to be the Will Riker dad, and he's a fun guy, so he's going to be fun dad. And I think that's again trying to find what rings true to the character and connecting those two in that relationship.
On the subject of Thaddeus, much later in the book, the boy is gravely injured in the crossfire of the Jazari skirmish. Through the Jazari's advanced tech, they're able to heal the boy using nanoprobes, but as Dr. Tala points out in the book, healing Thad carries the inherent possibility of complications later in life. Seeing as how he is cured with synthetic tech, can it be assumed that which healed him is also what got him sick later on down the line with the silicon-based virus?
Well, it's not quite the reason why he gets sick. This is a conversation that Kirsten and I had is we were talking about, we wanted to lay a few things, lay the keel for the way that Thad's storyline will play out in the TV show. So there is definitely a line you can draw from him being healed by the Jazari through to the circumstances of his death. And we do kind of foreshadow that a couple of times as well, is where there's one of the characters saying, you know, he basically says to the kid in not so many words, enjoy your life while it lasts.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And so, and it's like, you know, maybe the characters in the story, of course, this all goes right over their head, but us as the viewers and the readers go, did he mean something? Or does he know something that he's not telling? And of course, you know, they're not going to go to Riker and Troy and go, well, you know, in a couple of years' time, you might be burying this little guy. Sorry, they're not going to do that, right? They're just going to let them have the life that they have. But I think Thad's future is definitely changed by the events that take place in the Dark Veil, but it's not the sole cause of them.
It does feel like, though, that maybe this was going to be the end of his life right here. So even, you know, it's really sad that he dies in the future. It feels like that he gets like an extension on life, like even if it's not much, but it's, you know, it sounds like in generally like he's in good health now and he gets to experience it. And I don't know, I think it's sad, but there's something good there, you know. He didn't die there. So
yeah, I mean, Thad's death is the death of a child is always a tragedy, you know, and it's meant to be a tragedy. And part of the emotions that I want you to carry away as the reader when you get to the end of this book is I want you to like Thad, and I want you to be sad that you're never going to see him again, because you're feeling a bit of the emotion that Riker and Troy will feel, and that's what I want to do. Is I want to make you feel connected to those characters at the end of the narrative.
Yeah. So going back to the Jazari, you got to create and flesh out this brand new alien race. Learning about them and later uncovering their secret was one of the greatest joys of this book. What were their origins as far as getting them on the page?
Now, it's interesting you say brand new alien race, because they're not. They're not a new alien race. They're a race that you have seen before in Star Trek.
Ooh.
Yeah, I said earlier on about how, you know, not everybody's found all the Easter eggs. I mean, this is a big spoiler. Do you want me to tell you, or shall I just?
I'm dying.
Yes!
I'm dying.
Yeah, please.
The secret of the Jazari is they don't actually exist. They're a fictional race created by a race of androids. So they pretend to be a race called the Jazari, but what they're actually doing is wandering around the Federation and other worlds, just observing us, pretty much in the same way that like Starfleet does with, you know, we've seen that in episodes of the show, right? In fact, I actually even called them out on it when they say, well, we've been doing this for a while. Riker and Troy are a bit kind of, that's a bit rude. And they go, oh, wait a second, didn't we do that as well? Okay.
They made a whole movie about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, I guess if it was good for us, I guess you can't really call it rude if you were doing it to other species too. But the Jazari are an android species, and there is a sequence in the book where they talk about their origins, and they say, well, this is not who we really are. They're going to peel the mask off.
Yeah.
Because they're androids, their exterior kind of appearance is malleable, as they can change what they look like. You know, they can change their race, their species, their gender, size, whatever. And we see a few sort of moments of what they were originally, and they are the androids from the Harry Mudd episode, I Mudd. Because if you remember that episode, what happens is the Enterprise turns up on this planet, and Harry Mudd's found this planet of androids, and the androids talk about having been sent from another galaxy to kind of observe and sort of like they're kind of like a species of space probes. You know, they've been sent to this planet to figure stuff out. And obviously, in that episode, which is kind of play for laughs, right? Things don't go that well, and they kind of mess up their first contact with humanity. And I always wondered at the end of that episode, after everybody leaves, what do the androids do? And I just kind of thought they were going to sit down and go, well, that didn't work. You know, these humans, these weird, crazy humans, they messed with us completely and they busted up our programming. And it's like, okay, right, you know, they're androids. What are they going to do? They're going to figure out if they've got a programming problem, they're going to fix it. So they figured out, okay, how can we retool what we're doing? How can we change our mission, reprogram ourselves, externalize some of our software into a different function? So next time when we meet humans, they don't kind of make us malfunction and baffle us into sort of this crazy sort of state. And so that was the concept of them, is that those robots, they go, those android people, they go away and they reinvent themselves, and then they return as the Jazari.
Yeah, you just blew my mind with that.
I know what we're watching later.
Yeah, I'm doing an iMud watch along on the Discord later. I have to say, one of my favorite parts of the book is when pardon me if I don't pronounce her name right. Major, is it Halleck or the Tal Shiar operative? Yeah, Halleck, and she's very much coming to the conclusion that the Jazari have been spying on them on Romulus, and for them to have spies on Romulus is the ultimate, like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just such a
she was incensed.
Yeah, just because this is what the Romulans do. They're the spies, and the fact that they're being spied on, I loved that. This book definitely helps, bridge the gap a little bit more, right, between the TNG era and Picard, and talking about Major Halleck. She's not only a member of the Tal Shiar, but of the Zhat Vash, who we get to know very well through the show. We get the initial creepings through that, Will maybe wants to also possibly pack it up and become a family man after, especially what happens with Thaddeus. I guess the question is, how was it getting to fill in more of these dots about Will, about the Zhat Vash? And I guess, is there a plan moving forward for more of these Picard novels?
Wow, it's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, sorry. It was a bit of a double punch there.
So we'll start off talking about Halleck as a character. I wanted, we've seen the sort of the backstabbing Tal Shiar kind of operative. We've seen that character a few times. And I wanted Halleck to be that character, because immediately I have to set up an adversarial relationship between her and Commander Madaka, who's the captain of the Romulan ship, because I wanted to create, Madaka is like a Romulan version of Riker. And so I needed to have a foil for him to work across. And I wanted somebody who, I didn't want to mess around or equivocate and say, she's the bad guy. I want to make it very clear, she's the villain of the piece. But to kind of give her a little bit more shading, I was looking at the scenes in Picard when we see what happens when they have the admonition, when they go to the planet and they see the vision. And we see people blowing their brains out because the vision is so terrifying. And other people just like mutilating themselves because they're driven insane by this. And you get the sense that only the people with the strongest constitution and the strongest kind of mental toughness could possibly be confronted by this thing and get away with it and carry on. And I thought, well, what if you were kind of in the middle? It didn't drive you crazy enough to blow your brains out, but it did unhinge you seriously to the point that you're kind of functioning, but you're not quite right in the head anymore. It's knocked a few screws loose. And that was how I characterized Halleck. So I wanted her to be somebody who, she was already a person of very dubious morals because she's in the Tal Shiar. But then she has the admonition and all bets are off. And suddenly she's willing to do absolutely anything. And she has, on a low level, she has gone crazy. This has made her insane because it's just destroyed part of her mentally that she will never get back. And so what we see is, we see that sort of, she's fracturing, and she's always been a bit damaged, but now she's more damaged. And as the events of the story take place, that damage just gets worse and worse and worse until she's at the point where she is full blown, absolutely, completely off of her rocker, ready to just wipe out and kill absolutely everybody. So
and you can do that with some of the decisions that she makes in the book.
Absolutely. So I wanted to kind of show that slow mental degradation of what's happening to her, all of because she's had this terrible experience that has basically destroyed what little good there was in her of a person. So that's kind of how that connects up to the Zat Vash. What was the second part of your question?
It's about Will, because when we see Will in Picard, he hasn't fully retired. He's on reserve duty, but he has become a family man. He's built a cabin. He's got a house, and that. So that's how we kind of get those little bits of doubt in him in this book about maybe I do want to pack it up.
Right. When we've written Will in the Litverse books, he doesn't have that doubt. He's very much been a kind of guy where he's navigating between being a family man and being a starship captain, because he still has that energy in him to drive to go out there and boldly go and the strange new worlds, all that cool stuff, right? But what I wanted to show in Dark Veil was if he was pushed the other way. So he has this tragedy happen to him, and the doubt that probably he has in both versions of the story is much bigger here. It's much more magnified. And so he articulates that question. He thinks, am I actually doing the right thing? And the doubt takes root in a different way, because we're seeing a different incarnation of the character. And he externalizes that when he's having that conversation with Picard, because Riker is being pulled in two different directions. And this kind of shakes out of the decision that Picard made to resign, because Picard goes in that episode and we see him in flashback and he says, well, I need this to happen, and the fleet says no, and he goes, well, I'll resign. And they go, well, off you go, there's the door, don't let it hit you in the ass on the way out, right? And Picard has no choice but to sort of go off to his farm and be angry about it. And I asked myself the question, well, what would Riker do when he finds out about that? Maybe one impulse would be, well, if Picard's going to resign, I'm going to resign too. I'm going to stand by my friend. But then the other impulse might be, but if I stay in Starfleet, I can kind of show my displeasure for this, but also maybe try to do something for it. Because if you're outside the tent, you can't affect what's going on inside the tent. Yes, so that's kind of Riker's feeling. But as time has passed, a year after this, he's not seeing any changes. And he's wondering, are we really, me being in Starfleet, is it going to make a difference? And I think what we're kind of setting up there is the idea that some point past this, he looks at his life and he says, I nearly lost my son. I nearly lost my wife. And these terrible things are happening. I don't know if I can make a difference anymore. And that's the point that he decides that maybe we'd be better off charting our own course and leaving Starfleet.
Yeah.
But that's in the future at this point.
And then the last part of that was, this has been just such a pleasure, both with this book and the previous book, to kind of get all that fleshed out. I guess, is there a plan for, is this going to be a line of multiple Picard books?
There is already, I believe, another Picard novel is on the way. I don't know who's writing it, and I don't know what it's about. We've had some discussions that I said earlier about the idea of doing a Captain Worf novel. I don't know who's writing that, if it is indeed even being written. It's a cool idea, though. I think somebody should definitely do it. And there have been some discussions about other characters from Picard that we've seen in the show. New characters have been introduced in the series. Wouldn't it be interesting to see a novel about, like, Rios? What was he like when he was in Starfleet? I think that's an interesting idea. I'd like to see more of Raffi as a character. I think Una McCormack, my colleague, did a great job in Last Best Hope, kind of building out that character.
Very much.
Maybe even some stuff with the androids or whatever. There's a lot of other characters we see in Star Trek Picard season 1. I think all of whom have interesting backstory that is hinted at. So all of those could be novels. So I don't think this is not Dark Veil is not the last of the Picard books. There will definitely be more.
Do you think there's a Lower Decks book out there somewhere? Because I don't know what that would look like, but I would read it.
I don't know. I had a conversation about that with a couple of friends on a Trek bulletin board. We were talking about what would be the best place to tell a Lower Deck story. And I don't know if a novel would be the right place.
Maybe like a graphic novel or something like that.
Yeah, I think that, because Lower Decks is like very fast and very quick, and all the joke, and a lot of the jokes are quite visual. I think a comic book or a graphic novel, to me as a writer, feels like that would be a good place to tell a Lower Decks kind of story. Having said that, if someone asked me to give it a crack, I'd take a try at it. Comedy's really hard, right? It's really difficult to be funny and to continue to be funny, especially in a book when you're writing 100,000 words, right? That's 100,000 word novel. That's like 10 episodes, 10 episodic scripts worth of stuff. That's 20 episodes of text of Lower Decks, right? To make one novel. So that's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of jokes. I think it would be hard to kind of keep that momentum up. But with a comic book, I think you could play with the format more. It just feels like it's closer to the intention of Lower Decks as a show.
Yeah, I would love that. So you talked about Picard, and I know that it was nice to see him in this book, and they actually talked about him possibly going and seeing the Baku again, because we just watched that movie, which was the timing is funny, but I just wanted to know from you, like, what made you put that in this book? Was that part of the plan, or did you feel like that you were just sort of helping to close those open loops that have been hanging out for a while?
One of the things about this being a Picard novel, and again, this has come up in a conversation with Kirsten, is I said, look, his name is on the book, and this is not a book about him. So doesn't that feel a bit disingenuous if we're just writing all about Troy and Riker? It's like, we're not going to write about Picard. It's like,
that's a good point.
It's like his name on the book, right? He needs to be in it. And I said, but we can't write every Picard book about Picard. Right? It has to be about other people too. So I kicked some ideas around. I thought, well, the way it would feel truthful to me is Picard is like almost like the framing device for this story. Not quite, but I wanted him to be in the book and have a presence. So we see him twice in the novel. First at the beginning, when Riker finds himself in a situation, he reaches out to Picard and he says, I could use your advice on this. And we just check in with Picard and we see him. It's a year after he's resigned. He's bumbling around the farm. He's just got his dog and he's not a happy man. And then Riker turns up to talk to him, and they have a nice conversation because they miss each other. And I enjoyed writing that because it's a nice warm moment of two friends having a conversation. And then at the end of the story, he talks to the whole of the Riker family. And again, it's a nice kind of warm moment as the story concludes. So I wanted to show Picard in a place where he is not personally a happy man, but he's having a conversation with something that makes him happier. Mm-hmm. So it's a kind of uplifting sort of thing. So I wanted to do that. And I had to find a way to put him in the story that kind of makes sense. I had to find a way to sort of explore what he's doing and where he's going to go. I'm sorry, I've drifted off the. What was the question again? I've drifted off the question.
Oh, I was just asking why you decided to include him or this part of the story in there, and you also mentioned like he decided not to go and hang out with the Baku and get all young.
Oh, yeah, Baku, that was it. That was the thing. Yeah, sorry, I lost the point there. Lost the thread of it. Yeah. So when I was putting my notes together for that initial scene, Star Trek Insurrection was on TV that week. and I thought, and I've been like watching some of my bits and pieces of my favorite episodes. One of the channels here in the UK, the Horror Channel, they run Star Trek every day. So you get episode of TOS and an episode of TNG. And I thought, I'll keep watching these episodes just now and then, just to keep hearing Picard's voice in my head, so I can make sure it's fresh and true. And I turned on the TV, and Star Trek Insurrection had started. And I'll be honest with you, it's not my favorite Trek movie.
No, not mine either.
I mean, let's cards on the table here. It's my least favorite TNG movie. But
wait, what's your favorite, real quick?
The TNG, my favorite TNG movie.
TNG movie.
Yeah. First Contact, man.
Yeah, First Contact is definitely my favorite TNG movie. In terms of all of the movies, Wrath of Khan, obviously.
Yeah.
If you say any other answer, you're wrong. Clearly. Anyway.
First Contact.
First Contact's great is my favorite TNG movie. So, but I was watching it again and I was listening to Picard's voice and I was reminding myself of it. And then I just started thinking, about the relationship he had with Anij and the Baku. And I just, this idea just bloomed in my head, is that maybe the Baku had reached out to him and said, well, we heard you resign from Starfleet. You want to come hang out with us? And because he had that relationship with Anij that never really got consummated, And I thought it was a fun way to just reach back into something from Picard's past, because it also allows me to illustrate that he's in quite a sad place at this point in his life. And here's somebody from his past going, you want to come and hang out with us? It's like a friend reaching out to a friend. We heard this bad thing happen to you. Do you want to come and hang out? Maybe we cheer you up. And Picard says, I'm not going. I want to stay here. And I want to stay here and continue to be pissed off.
Wallow in self-pity.
Wallow in self-pity, right? And because he's still processing that emotion at that point in the story. And so I thought that was
the dog.
Do it. Say again?
Who sent him the dog?
I don't know.
Dang it.
I don't know. I wasn't, we talked about that and it was like, let's just leave that as a mystery.
Okay.
So
I had one other question. You talked about Worf being the captain, and that's been sort of hinted at before. What's that story? Do you want to write that story about Worf being the captain of the Enterprise?
Well, originally we talked about doing a novel where we would tell, it would be 2 books in one. So we would have the Riker Troy story and we would have Worf on the Enterprise story. And I said, you know what, that's too big a story for just one book. Yeah, one book's not enough. It needs to be 2 different novels. So I don't know if I'm the right guy for that. I mean, Worf as a character, I think he's cool. I've never really written him, so not in depth. So it would be interesting to sort of get a handle on him. I went for Riker and Troy because I knew them and I was familiar with them, and I immediately said, oh, I know I can tell that story.
And we have to say, you do an absolutely wonderful job getting Riker on the page. He's, when we're reading him, that is Will Riker. So just very well done.
Oh, thank you very much.
And also I don't know if you have any input on the narrator, but the narrator did such an amazing job in the audiobook. Like I loved all of the voices, and it was nice to hear the pronunciation of all of the different characters' names, and just that really sort of filled in the world, and I thought they did a good job.
Yeah, that's I have to give a big shout out there to Robert Petkov. He's the guy who's doing the writing a lot of our stuff, and he just does a fantastic job. I only just heard it like a couple of days ago, and I was really pleased with it. I was listening to just the opening scene, and he's doing Riker's voice, and he just kind of tosses it off, and I'm like, man, that sounds great. It does. It's not exactly Jonathan Frakes, but it feels. It's
got that timbre and that flow.
Yeah, exactly that. It's got the right texture of his voice, and you believe that it's Will Riker. And they do such a great job with the character names and stuff. We have to work very closely. Before they go into the recording booth, I get sent a big list of all the weird names that I have put in a book, and they're like, okay, how do you pronounce this? And we have to have that conversation with the production team. And sometimes it's like, are you sure you want to do it that way, Jim? I'm like, oh, how about this way or that way? We have to make sure it doesn't mean something horrible in a foreign language. That you aren't accidentally saying kind of like, son of 1,000 hedgehogs or something. Your language, it's not some horrible insult. We have to try and make sure we go through all these kind of things. But yeah, that's fun to do.
So we also couldn't go without mentioning the "It's a Fake" Easter egg to the DS9 episode in the pale moonlight.
Yeah, that was again, that was another one of those things where it just happened while I was writing it. And I got to that line and I thought and I started typing, this is a fake. And I thought, do I take that out? Is it? Because I did it without even thinking. And I'm like, oh, wait, I've got a Romulan guy saying this is a fake. And I thought, you know what? To hell with that. It's going to lean into it. So I changed. So instead of him saying, I think this is fake, I just wrote him saying, it's a fake. I'm like, let's just go for it, because people will see that and they'll think it's funny, so I left it in.
I'm sure like any television or any book, there's going to be the people out there like, oh, that's such lip service, such fan service. But I'm like, oh my God, how brilliant was that? I mean, I just started chuckling. I absolutely,
we were here for it.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. James, as we wrap up, we have to talk about the big cameo at the end of the novel as Captain Riker meets Ambassador Spock for the very first time, learning that the Vulcan kind of spoke to the Romulans on his behalf, right? Near the end of that conversation, Spock mentions that he may help have a solution to help preserve the Romulan civilization, and that he wanted to talk to Geordi about some engineering specifications. Was this to set up the events of I don't know if you read them, the Countdown comics back in 2009 that kind of created the Kelvinverse, or instead the unification of the Vulcan and Romulan people that we see this past season in Star Trek Discovery, or maybe both?
It's both. I mean, it's a combination of all of those things. First off, I wanted to do this framing device, you know, so the story begins with Riker being walked into this tribunal, and these hidden shadowy figures. I wanted it to be reminiscent of the tribunal scene from Star Trek Star Trek 6.
Yes.
With Kirk and McCoy. I wanted you to feel the kind of similar sort of thing. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, well, you know, and I just had this wild idea. What if it was Spock? What if Spock was there watching this going? And I threw that out to Kirsten, and she was like, yeah, run with it.
Yeah, nice.
There's more we could do. And once we started talking about the idea of it, she said, you know what, we can bring a bunch of other stuff in too. And she really liked the idea of using that little cameo at the end when Spock finally turns up and says, well, that was me making sure the Romulans didn't flush you out an airlock. And Rocky's like, gee, thanks, man. I appreciate you doing it. I mean, great just to write Spock anyway, because he's a cool character. So that was me being a bit self-indulgent there, getting to write Spock as a character. But it also gave us the opportunity to, again, address a little bit of Star Trek continuity that hasn't been addressed in the show. Because Star Trek Picard is about the fallout from the Romulan supernova. And also, we know that's the instigating event for the Kelvin timeline. Spock trying to stop that from happening and failing and ending up traveling back in time and the timeline split and what have you. We wanted to address a couple of things there. First of all, we addressed the idea that Spock is setting up the stuff that will happen that will trigger the Kelvin timeline. But also, we wanted to say that, you know, the last time we saw him on screen, Unification Part 2, he was attempting to bring the Vulcans and the Romulans back together. And we wanted to say that just because the supernova is happening, that has not gone away. Spock is still working towards Vulcan-Romulan reunification. And of course, we see that play out in Discovery with, you know, I love the fact that episode was called Unification Part 3.
It was my favorite episode of the season.
That's terrific. You know?
I loved it.
In fact, just this week, I saw someone, as my buddy Dayton Ward again posted up a meme, and he said that Nivar stands for now it's Vulcan and Romulus.
Yeah, I saw the meme. Brilliant.
That was really great.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
So what we want to do is we wanted to address a bunch of those ideas. And I'd read the Star Trek Countdown comics, and I know they're kind of in a shaky sort of, is it canon, is it not quite canon? But one of the things that's great about being one of the tie-in writers is we get to choose the stuff we put in the story. And I really liked the little idea that the jellyfish ship that Spock pilots was built by Geordi LaForge. Yeah. And the idea that Spock and Geordi had worked together to build this really cool ship. And I thought, you know what, I like that. I want to bring that back, that idea. So that's what that conversation is Spock says to Riker, could you put me in touch with Geordi? I've got some questions with him about warp tech. And the idea is what, they go away and have that conversation. And Geordi goes, I got this cool ship. Maybe you'd like to borrow it.
Yeah.
And that conversation goes on from there. So it was me just pulling all these different aspects together to say, yeah, we are setting up the Kelvin timeline, and we are also setting up Unification 3 and a whole bunch of other stuff, just saying, you know, these things are all still going on in the background, even if they're not right there in your face as a primary part of the story.
Yeah, I absolutely, I love that he was kind of at the tail end there. It was just really awesome. James, we want to thank you so much for coming on the pod to chat with us. A lot to talk about. It's a great book. Before we wrap up, is there anything you know, you would you know, oh sorry, you know, real quick, actually, we always like to ask our guests that we have on the show that are especially, you know, big Trekkies, what their favorite Trek character and episode is. And do you have either of those, or do you just love it all?
That's such a tough call. You know, every time someone says to me, what's your favorite thing? And I'm like, oh, I can't pick just one. I mean, if I had to, I could pick like, oh, I love this character from this show. I mean, Kirk's always been a favorite character of mine, but so has Riker. I love Major Kira as one of my favorites. I loved Reed, and then I mean, I picked like one from each episode. So Reed from Enterprise. I pick Saru from Discovery. Who am I missing? I pick
Voyager.
Say again.
Voyager. Who's your
Voyager?
favorite from Voyager?
We pick Janeway from Voyager, definitely.
Yeah.
Nice.
I always felt like Janeway, in terms of the captains, Janeway felt closest to Kirk to me, in terms of kind of that sort of take no prisoners, just do what needs to be done kind of attitude about it. What show have I missed? In Picard, I really like Rios. I think he's a lot of fun. I'd love to learn more about his character. And Lower Decks, Boimler, because he's such
Boimler, wow.
Yeah.
such a fuck up, but I love him. He's so funny, right? He's just
He
constantly
doesn't get enough
I
love.
feel like I hate to say it, but I think he's probably close to what a lot of us would be. Like, we all think we'd be Mariner, but we'd probably be Boimler.
I would be Rutherford, let's be honest.
You would.
Everybody wants to, that's exactly the truth. Everybody wants to be Mariner, but they know in their heart of hearts you'd be
I'm just
Boimler
gonna-
or Rutherford if you were like
Yeah, I'll just go stare at the warp core all day. James, any upcoming projects that you want to share with us, and where can people find you online and on the internet?
The best place to catch up with me is I'm on Twitter most of the time, posting pictures of interesting clouds or talking about Star Trek or nerding out about things. You can find me there on @JMSwallow, or come by my website, which is jswallow.com. That's pretty much your one-stop shop for everything about me, all my Trek work, everything else I've written. It's all right there. Links to pick up the books or just read more about it. As for future projects, I'm working on a couple of things right now, but nothing I can really talk about it. That is all non-disclosure. I do have a new Star Trek project in the works.
Nice.
That has not been announced yet. You will probably hear more about that maybe towards the latter half of the year. So keep watching the skies there.
So you'll have to come back on so we can hear all about it.
Yes, absolutely. James, thank you so much. You can catch The Dark Veil now wherever you buy books or your favorite e-reader. That is going to, there it is. Oh, it's so good. I'm going to read it again. That is going to do it for our episode this week. We will be back for our first kind of going back to Thursdays next week with the end of our TNG film deep dives with Star Trek Nemesis. So be prepared for that one. I think it's going to be a heated debate.
Oh, God.
Yes.
So for Eric, for Hawk, for Aaron, for our guest James, for Brittany, who caught at the top of the show, I am Julian. We say live long and prosper. Majram. Good night.
Majram.
Thanks for beaming into our podcast today. If you want to keep the hailing frequencies open, you can subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. Like what you hear? Put in a good word with Starfleet and leave us a 5-star review.